Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
Today we are taking a deep dive into, I think, one of the most vital analyses of our modern data systems. It's Cathy O'Neil's essential book, Weapons of Math Destruction: How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy.
That title, it really grabs you, doesn't it? It takes something we all think of as clean, neutral algorithms, big data, and right away it calls it a weapon.
It really forces you to ask a question. What if these systems that are supposedly optimizing our world well, what if they're actually just optimizing inequality?
Yeah, and that's the core of what O'Neil is getting at. She argues these data-driven systems, which are, popping up everywhere, replacing human judgment in hiring, in lending, in policing. They present themselves as this objective truth, right? Cloaked in the impartiality of math. So our mission in this deep dive is really to pull back that curtain.
Absolutely. For you, the listener, the goal here is to really get the mechanics of how these systems work, to see why they're so often flawed, and not by accident, but like by design.
Exactly. And to understand where we have to demand some accountability before they, entrench inequality even further and start to undermine some really fundamental democratic ideas.
It's a crucial investigation because these systems, the ones O'Neil calls WMDs, they're hidden, they're powerful, and you can't really appeal them. They govern our lives, but we have almost no say in how they work.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I think the best place to start is with the author herself, Cathy O'Neil, because she wasn't some outside critic. She was an insider.
A true insider. She trained as a pure mathematician in algebraic number theory, and then she jumped right into the heart of high finance. She became a quant at the hedge fund D.E. Shaw.
Which is a huge deal.
Oh, massive. She describes it as this thrilling move from the, quiet, abstract world of academia into this high-octane environment where math was being applied to the real world.
And making real money.
Trillions of dollars. The models she and her colleagues were building were sloshing trillions around the global economy.
It's interesting how she saw it at first. She thought hedge funds were kind of morally neutral, right? Just efficient scavengers finding tiny flaws in the market.
Yeah, and at D.E. Shaw, which was like the Harvard of hedge funds, the mathematicians were kings. The human traders were just there to execute what the algorithms told them to do.
But she was there at a very specific moment in time.
A cataclysmic one.
Yeah.
The financial crisis hits in the fall of 2008, just a year after she starts. And she writes, this line is so powerful. She says, "The crash made it all too clear that mathematics, once my refuge, was not only deeply entangled in the world's problems, but also fueling many of them."
Wow. So the math wasn't neutral at all.
Not at all. It was providing the scale, the efficiency, to make already flawed systems, like, say, subprime mortgages, into these global forces of destruction.
And the human cost, which had been invisible behind all the numbers and spreadsheets, suddenly became real.
Agonizingly real. Millions of people lost their homes, their jobs. And for O'Neil, it was this profound moral and professional crisis. She left finance in 2009 and basically rebranded as a data scientist for social justice.
Because she saw the same thing happening everywhere.
Exactly. The same kind of rogue, high-impact algorithms she saw in finance were quietly operating in every industry, making inequality worse and just disproportionately punishing the poor.
So she had the perfect perspective. She knew how these engines were built. Which brings us to her foundational concept, what a model actually is.
Right, because we throw around words like model and algorithm, but she's very specific. A model, she says, is just an abstract representation of a process.
It could be anything.
Anything. Predicting a stock price or, and I love this analogy she uses, planning a family meal. You're using data and rules to predict an outcome.
I love that meal analogy. You have to model what your kids will eat versus what's in the fridge versus how tired you are. And it's dynamic, right? You get feedback. Okay, they hated the peas, less peas next time.
It's immediate. It's personal. But the key point O'Neil makes is that a model is always a simplification. It has to leave stuff out to be useful.
And that means the person building it is making choices. What data matters? What's the goal? What does success even look like?
And those choices reflect the builder's goals, their ideology, their biases. This is the big shift in perception. O'Neil says models are fundamentally opinions embedded in mathematics.
That's the phrase. They're not truth. They're human values, just automated.
Exactly. It looks objective, but it's loaded with ethical choices. If a kid designs the family meal model, success is ice cream for dinner. A nutritionist's model is about maximizing vitamins.
And a military logistician's model for a wartime population might just be about hitting a minimum calorie count at the lowest cost, ignoring everything else.
Right, so the definition of success, the variables you include, these are all moral and political choices. And that brings us to the moment a simple model becomes something destructive.
When it becomes a weapon of math destruction, a WMD.
And she has 4 specific criteria for that. The first one is scale.
So it has to be big.
It has to be huge. Scale is what turns one prejudiced banker in a small town into this tsunami force that hits millions of people at once. It creates norms that are almost like laws.
It's the difference between a minor problem and a life-altering one. Like, if one landlord is biased against you, that's unfair. But if a credit model used by everyone flags you as high risk,
then that verdict follows you everywhere.
Yeah.
To your next apartment application, your car insurance, even your job hunt. It's unavoidable.
Okay, so that's scale. What's the second criterion?
The second is that WMDs are opaque. We call it the black box problem.
And this isn't an accident, is it?
No, it's often deliberate. The inner workings are hidden, usually called intellectual property or their secret sauce.
Yeah.
So if you can't see how the system is judging you, you can't argue with it. You can't fix your score. The model is a fortress.
Which leads right to the third point.
Yeah.
They're unregulated.
Completely. They operate outside of any real oversight. They deliver these unflinching verdicts. You can't appeal. You can argue with your boss, but you can't argue with an algorithm.
The people using them just shrug and say, the score is the score.
They outsource responsibility to the machine, so there's no way for the person who's been harmed to get any recourse.
Okay, so you have scale, opacity, and lack of regulation. That's a pretty toxic mix already.
But it's the fourth one that makes the whole thing truly vicious. The self-reinforcing feedback loop.
This is where the model starts to create its own reality.
That's exactly. The models output the score, the ranking. It justifies the system, which then generates new biased data that confirms the original prejudice. It's this toxic, self-perpetuating cycle where the model defines its own truth.
So we've defined the weapon. Let's get into the core ideas, the actual mechanisms of damage. And that starts with the myth of algorithmic neutrality. You said computers can't deal with concepts like fairness, so they use something else?
They use proxies. A proxy is just a substitute metric. It's something that's easy to measure, but it's often a really inexact and unfair stand-in for what you actually care about.
And what's a big, high-stakes example of a proxy just completely distorting a whole industry?
The U.S. News & World Report college rankings model is the perfect case study. The goal was to measure educational quality, but how do you do that? What students actually learn is complex. It's hard to quantify.
So they used proxies instead.
They use proxies. SAT scores of incoming students, the percentage of alumni who donate money, and how many applicants the school rejects.
Wait, so instead of measuring the quality of the teaching, they measured the quality of the students who got in and the wealth of the alumni.
That's the massive flaw. And yet, this model became the national standard. The result was this catastrophic feedback loop. Colleges were suddenly in an arms race to gain those specific metrics instead of actually improving education.
So they'd start rejecting perfectly good students just to make their acceptance rate look lower?
Or they'd pour money into fancy dorms and climbing walls, stuff that looks good on a brochure, instead of hiring more professors. The model became their destiny. If your ranking dropped, the best students and faculty wouldn't come, alumni wouldn't donate, and your ranking would drop even more.
The system just feeds itself.
And the guy who created the model even admitted the proxies were just the next best thing because the real data was impossible to get.
That's the thing with proxies, right? They're easy to game. O'Neil says if your hiring model uses Twitter followers as a proxy for social media skill, people will just go buy thousands of bot followers for $20.
And you see this exact problem in hiring, especially after that landmark Supreme Court case, Griggs v. Duke Power Company, back in 1971. That ruling basically banned the use of broad intelligence tests because they were found to be discriminatory.
So companies didn't rethink their hiring, they just found a new proxy.
They just pivoted. They moved to personality tests, like the 5-factor model. Now something like 60 to 70% of job applicants have to take one. And the research shows they're often terrible predictors of job performance.
So if they don't predict performance, what do they do?
According to one attorney, O'Neil, quotes, their main purpose isn't to find the best employee. It's to exclude as many people as possible, as cheaply as possible.
Volume exclusion.
Exactly. Take the case of Kyle Bam. He was a great student, but he had some mental health issues. He got red-lighted from minimum wage jobs at places like Kroger because of a personality test.
A job bagging groceries. And he couldn't even see the score or appeal it. The model just decided he was too risky.
He was blackballed from the job market before he even talked to a person. And that's exactly where we see the destructive feedback loop in action. His exclusion just reinforces his isolation, which then proves the model was right about his risk.
Let's dig deeper on that feedback loop, especially somewhere with really high stakes, like the criminal justice system. You're talking about recidivism models like the LSIR.
Yeah, the level of service inventory revised. It's a WMD used in dozens of states to help judges with sentencing and parole. It's a huge questionnaire, over 50 factors. And while it can't legally ask about race,
It asks about proxies for race.
highly correlated proxies, things like, do your friends have criminal records? Are you employed? What's your zip code? Are you married? These aren't measures of your character, they're measures of your socioeconomic situation.
But the model treats them like they're a measure of your risk. And if you get a high-risk score, you get a longer sentence.
And there's the loop. You spend more time in a brutal, criminogenic environment. And studies show that longer sentences actually increase the chance you'll commit another crime when you get out.
So the system designed to lower risk is actually increasing it.
It is. And then the person gets released back into the same poor neighborhood, now with an even longer criminal record, which makes it harder to get a job, which reinforces all the original high-risk proxies.
And the model says, see, we told you he was high risk.
But the model helped create that outcome. It validated itself by perpetuating the injustice. It's a self-licking ice cream cone of a system.
That is deeply disturbing. You see a similar kind of opaque, self-justifying loop in teacher evaluations with that value-added model, or VAM.
VAM was a disaster.
Yeah.
It tried to measure a teacher's effectiveness based on their students' standardized test scores. So teachers like Sarah Wysocki, who was by all accounts a great teacher, started getting fired because of these totally chaotic, opaque scores.
How chaotic.
One year, her VAM score was a 6 out of 100. Catastrophic. The very next year, it was a 96. That kind of swing tells you the model is measuring noise. It's measuring the random mix of students she got that year, not her teaching.
And because it's a black box, she has no idea what she did wrong or how to improve.
So when Wysocki and hundreds of others were flagged as failures, the district just fired them. The system doesn't check if the score was right. It just sees getting rid of 206 bad teachers as proof that the model works. Plausible deniability. It wasn't me, it was the numbers.
This brings us to the third core insight, and this one is just heartbreaking. It's how the scale of these WMDs amplifies harm, especially for the most vulnerable people.
This is where O'Neil contrasts her little family meal model with these massive industrial-scale systems. When a data system scales up, the harm it does becomes catastrophically exploitative, and the for-profit college industry is a prime example.
Institutions like Corinthian College, which is gone now, but they targeted the most desperate people in society.
With surgical precision, Corinthian had a $120 million annual marketing budget. They pursued 2.4 million leads a year. The volume is just staggering.
And the models were explicitly designed to find and exploit vulnerability.
A Senate committee report found internal documents telling recruiters to target people categorized as welfare mom, W kids, pregnant ladies, recent divorce, low self-esteem,
Wow.
experienced a recent death, physically, mentally abused, recent incarceration. They were literally selling a dream to people at their absolute lowest point. Vulnerability was the most profitable data point they had.
And the targeting was so specific. How did they find these people?
Through lead generators, like a company called Neutron Interactive, they'd post fake job ads or ads for food stamps to get people to hand over their contact info. Then they'd sell those leads to the colleges for up to $150 each.
And the outcome for the students was just massive debt for worthless degrees.
Exactly. Corinthian left behind $3.5 billion in debt. The diplomas were often worth less than a community college degree, sometimes no better than a high school diploma. The models promised a way out of poverty, but were engineered to monetize desperation.
That intersection of data and exploitation takes us to the fourth big insight: the tyranny of e-scores and the punishment of poverty. And we have to be clear, this isn't the old FICO score.
Right. FICO is designed with a clear goal. Predict if you'll default on a loan based on your financial behavior. It was regulated, and you knew how to improve your score. It had a clear feedback loop.
But these new e-scores are the WMDs of finance. They're arbitrary, they're secret.
They're a total mess. They use thousands of proxies. Your zip code, your web browsing history, what you buy, they put you into these secret hierarchies that decide whether you get to talk to a person or get stuck in an automated high-cost system.
It sounds like we've just automated the biases of 1950s banker who used your neighborhood or last name as a proxy for trustworthiness.
That is precisely the parallel O'Neil draws. E-scores run thousands of people-like-you calculations. And if you get bucketed as high risk because you live in a poor neighborhood, the credit card offer you see has a lower limit and way higher interest rates.
Which creates that same nasty feedback loop. People who are already struggling get gouged, which makes it harder to pay their bills, which lowers their score even more.
Look at the payday loan industry. A company called Zest Finance uses up to 10,000 data points. They even analyze if you use proper spelling and capitalization on the application form.
You're kidding. They penalize people for bad spelling.
It sounds absurd, but it's a very effective proxy for class and education level. People with less formal education are more likely to make those errors. So if they do get a loan, their fees might be higher because of their language skills. And when they struggle to pay, the model says, see, high risk.
You even see this in things you have to buy, like car insurance.
That's the price optimization algorithm. Insurers like Allstate use it. Their models don't just calculate your driving risk, they calculate your likelihood of shopping around for a better price.
So if they think you're loyal, or maybe just don't know any better, they charge you more.
Even if you're a perfect driver, the goal isn't managing risk. It's maximizing profit by exploiting ignorance. The Consumer Federation of America found price increases of up to 800%, completely disconnected from driving history.
And this is where you see the moral choice in the math. The actual important data, like a drunk driving conviction, can matter less than your credit score.
O'Neil gives this shocking example from Florida, where a good driver with poor credit paid, on average, over $1,500 more than the exact same driver who had excellent credit and a recent DUI.
The system isn't optimizing for safety, it's optimizing for profit and punishing poverty.
The poor driver who can least afford it gets squeezed, which hurts their finances, which drops them into an even more vulnerable digital category.
Okay, so we've seen what WMDs are and how they work. Let's zoom out and look at the system as a whole. Why do these toxic systems stick around? It's about mapping the incentives.
Let's do it. You have the actors, institutions, designers, and subjects.
Okay, what drives the institutions? The companies, the schools, the police?
Efficiency, cost-cutting, and this is the big one, plausible deniability. They get to blame the objective number. The manager can say, I didn't fire him, the algorithm did.
And the designers, the data scientists building these things.
They're driven by profit. That's their main feedback. Or political currency. You know, the feeling that they're fixing a problem, like getting rid of bad teachers.
And then there's the subjects, us, the public.
We're subjected to the system, we lose our job, get a bad insurance rate, and we have no recourse. So we just internalize it and think, well, life's not fair, instead of questioning the system itself.
The real failure point seems to be this idea that profit becomes a proxy for truth. If the system makes money, it must be working.
That's it, exactly. For the companies running these things, like predatory lenders, the money pouring in is proof the model is a success. The data scientists get paid to tune the model to make more money, and they can lose sight of the human cost entirely.
And this persists in civic systems too, right? Through that failure point of opacity, the data is used to justify, not to improve.
Look at the criminal justice system again. These recidivism models are black boxes. They don't collect data on what might actually help, like the impact of solitary confinement or literacy programs on reoffending.
That's a great point. Amazon is a data lab, constantly testing everything to get you to buy again. The prison system actively avoids looking for positive signals.
Because the goal is justification, not improvement. A real scientist would be looking for what works, mental health care, job training, to make the system better. But a private prison that profits from high occupancy has zero incentive to fund research that might empty its beds.
And then you have the failure point of just misplaced trust in new tech, especially in policing with models like PredPol.
PredPol uses historical crime data to predict where crime will happen next. On the surface, the math is colorblind. But in segregated cities, geography is a fantastic proxy for race.
So if the past data shows biased police focusing on poor minority neighborhoods, the model just tells them to do more of the same.
It's a dangerous loop. Policing creates new data, often for low-level nuisance crimes, which then justifies more policing in that same neighborhood. It criminalizes poverty and gives a scientific-looking veneer to the status quo. The police chief can say, The math told us to go there.
It's weaponizing history. It sounds a lot like what happened with New York's stop and frisk policy.
It's the same logic. Stop enough people in a high-crime area, overwhelmingly young Black and Latino men, and you'll find enough petty crime to justify the policy. Every arrest becomes new data that feeds the justification.
So it twists the legal idea of probable cause into this huge net that just catches people for things that will be ignored in a wealthier neighborhood.
And all that biased data from predpol and stop and frisk funnels right back into the recidivism models, which then spits out a scientific-looking risk score for sentencing. The whole system just punishes people for being poor and living where they live.
So looking at today, these WMDs are now deeply embedded in the workplace, affecting everyone from minimum wage workers to executives.
Yeah, we're seeing these just-in-time logistics models applied to human scheduling. It creates that awful clopening phenomenon you hear about at places like Starbucks and Walmart.
Where you work the closing shift one night and the opening shift the next morning. What's the model's goal there?
Pure efficiency. Minimum staff, hour by hour, based on predicted customer traffic. This means the model generates these wildly irregular schedules, often with only a day or two of notice.
Which makes life impossible for workers. You can't get childcare, you can't go to school, you can't get a second job.
And you often can't qualify for health insurance because your hours are capped just below the threshold. The software is designed to serve the bottom line, and the workers are just treated like interchangeable parts in a machine.
And it's not just low-wage workers. White-collar employees are facing their own WMDs.
Absolutely. Systems like Catapora, which got famous after the 2008 crash, would analyze corporate emails and meeting schedules to find idea generators and connectors.
So they'd map out the social network of the company.
And when layoffs came, managers would look at the chart and start cutting the people who showed up as small, dim circles. O'Neil calls it digital phrenology.
It lets managers fire people and just blame the score instead of their own judgment.
Exactly. And the system never learns if it was wrong. It never follows up to see if that loser went on to be a huge success somewhere else. The failure is just blamed on the individual.
This black box scoring is everywhere now, especially in education and hiring, creating these automated gatekeepers.
72% of resumes are now screened by software first. They just look for keywords and simple fonts. So it immediately favors people who know how to game the system.
The people who try to stand out with creative formatting just get tossed into a digital trash can.
But the most disturbing part is when the algorithm is trained on a history of human prejudice. It just codifies and amplifies that bias with terrifying efficiency.
The example of St. George's Medical School in the UK is the classic case.
In the 1970s, they trained a computer to sort applications based on years of their past human decisions. But the human screeners have been rejecting women and non-white applicants at a high rate.
So the machine just learned to do the same thing.
It learned that things like foreign-sounding names or being a woman of childbearing age were correlated with rejection. So the program became a more consistent and efficient discriminator than the biased humans who built it.
Which gets back to O'Neil's point about the moral choice. They could have used that model to help those applicants, to find them resources. But the goal was punitive exclusion.
And if the workplace is full of WMDs, so is our civic life, especially with political micro-targeting.
Modern campaigns use massive amounts of data to find tiny groups of persuadable voters and then tailor messages just for them.
And the problem is this huge asymmetry of information. The campaigns have these deep dossiers on us, and they use them to feed us personalized, often emotional or deceptive messages.
So you could be seeing a fear-mongering ad that your neighbor, who has a different profile, will never see.
It fractures public discourse. Democracy depends on a shared reality, a common argument. Micro-targeting destroys that. Plus, it makes most voters worthless. All the money and attention just goes to a tiny slice of swing voters in a few key places.
The rest of us are just ignored because the algorithm has already decided how we'll vote.
And that just creates more cynicism and disengagement. Why bother participating if the model has already written you off?
All these examples, they all point to one systemic outcome. The algorithm replaces human judgment with procedure.
When you treat the model as infallible, managers and institutions get to outsource moral judgment. The procedure becomes the justification. Personal responsibility becomes plausible deniability.
This all fits so perfectly with the broader themes we look at here. Let's start with systems versus individual blame.
WMDs are a powerful force for individual blame. By using proxies for poverty, zip code, unemployment, the algorithms reinforce the idea that poor people are responsible for their own problems.
The model suggests the problem is the individual who is correctly scored as high risk, not the decades of disinvestment that created the risk in the first place.
Right. The system looks down at individual failure, not up at the systemic forces that cause it.
And this creates a clash of values, efficiency versus fairness. The Constitution is built for fairness, even if it's inefficient.
But WMDs prioritize ruthless efficiency because fairness is squishy and hard to code. A model that's 99% efficient but 1% biased against a whole group of people is still seen as a huge success.
So fairness becomes, as O'Neil calls it, a toxic emission of the model.
Like pollution from a factory that nobody wants to deal with. She argues we have to be willing to handicap the models to leave certain data out, even if it costs a little accuracy for the sake of fairness.
Which brings us to technocracy without accountability. Sometimes the market can push for fairness, like when IBM started offering same-sex partner benefits to attract talent.
Yeah, fairness was a side effect of optimizing for profit. But dismantling a WMD usually doesn't offer a company a clear profit incentive.
For-profit colleges and payday lenders depend on their WMDs.
And since the victims are often poor and politically voiceless, there's no real pressure to regulate them. The toxic cycles just continue because the money flows up and the costs slow down.
So in this system, metrics just replace meaning. You focus on the easy-to-count proxy Twitter followers, SAT scores, instead of actual value like student learning.
O'Neil's summary is really clear on this. Models are built from moral choices about what data to pay attention to. If we treat them like forces of nature, like the weather, we're just abdicating our responsibility.
But the math can be used for good. And this is the critical turning point. The choice between building models that punish and models that help.
This contrast is so important. A mathematical model can be disarmed just by changing its objective. Take the Hillsborough County Child Abuse Prediction Model in Florida.
It uses predictive analytics to find families most at risk of child abuse.
Now, if the goal was punishment to take kids away, it would be a terrifying WMD. But in Hillsborough County, the goal was to funnel resources and help to those families. Social workers, parenting classes, job assistance, before a tragedy happens.
And the outcome of choosing to help.
In the 2 years after they implemented it, Hillsborough County had 0 fatalities from child abuse. It's an incredible example of using the same tool for preservation instead of punishment.
There are other examples too, right? Like the slavery sleuth model.
Yeah, that model scores global supply chains for the likelihood of using slave labor. It flags suspicious spots, but it doesn't shut them down. It alerts the company so they can investigate and improve conditions. It forces accountability through transparency.
So the path forward isn't about getting rid of models, it's about transparency and accountability. WMDs need to be audited.
We need algorithmic audits, just like we have financial audits. Researchers are already building software robots that can probe job sites and search engines to find their hidden biases. That's how you crack open the black box.
And the laws have to catch up.
Urgently. We need to update laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act to cover these new big data personality and health scores. APO needs to be expanded to cover all the health data we're giving away to apps and search engines.
And the big ones, the e-scores and credit scores, they should be open and navigable. You should have the right to know how you're being judged.
It brings us back to O'Neil's central conflict. We moved away from the biased human banker toward the objective algorithm to try and increase fairness. But we've swung too far. We've replaced flawed humans with machines that are powerful, invisible, and have no capacity for moral judgment.
And if we don't impose our own common sense and our ethics on these systems, the WMDs will just keep multiplying, sorting us all into digital tribes instead of treating us like complex human beings.
It's an incredibly powerful and necessary argument. We can't recommend Cathy O'Neil's book, Weapons of Math Destruction: How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy, enough.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
And if you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.
As you go through your day, we invite you to reflect. Where in your life are opaque algorithms quietly shaping your opportunities, from your search results to your job application? We'll see you on the next deep dive.